ambassadors and representatives of international organizations accredited to Moscow are invited. Participants will speak on Ukrainian crisis, digital threats, and international information security. Traditionally, the meeting will start with the address by Minister Lavrov, who will make a presentation of the relevant Russian approaches to various aspects of international information security. He will also focus on digital threats that related to the Ukrainian crisis. We hope that this event and this recommended format will help and allow the diplomatic community to have a constructive and open dialogue on the relevant issues of international agenda, with the situation in Ukraine being one of them. So we'll make an announcement, and I would like to touch on an important historical topic. March 5th will mark the 80th anniversary of the infamous Fulton speech by Winston Churchill. I will recall that speaking with this public speech on international relations in the Westminster University in the American city of Fulton, that Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, as a private person and without being limited to his official duties, took the liberty to make quite hardline, ideologized statements about the USSR. At the same time, this British official recognized the post-war leadership of the US and Western world, and he called the brotherly union of Anglo-speaking countries to save the world from tyranny. According to many student books on international relations and history of international relations, the Fulton speech of Winston Churchill launched the start of the bipolar confrontation, and quite often they talk about rivalry of the two military and political blocs. So looking back on the ideas of Winston Churchill that he made in Fulton, we can see that they miraculously coincide with the narratives of Western politicians of the 21st century. 80 years later, the history repeats, and we are witnessing the repeating of history, and the slogans to protect democratic and European values. The West supplies weapons to Ukrainian neo-Nazis. This NATO-centric Western coalition, call it whatever you want, sends weapons to Ukrainian neo-Nazis. This Western community, collective West, under the same pretext, they invaded Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, and many other states. The declassified archives of documents show that, again, let's go back to facts. In 1945 to 1946, well, maybe they were playing poker, smoking a cigar, and drinking a glass of something pleasant. Anglo-Saxon politicians were discussing secret plans of Operation Unthinkable, which was developed by the British General Staff, and Totality Operation, which was developed by Americans. These two operations viewed possible options for the aggressive war against the recent ally in the anti-Hitlerite coalition, the USSR, who took the brunt of the war against the Nazi Germany, and they discussed options to launch a nuclear strike on the Soviet territory. And information about the plans to provide nuclear weapons to Zelensky's regime is being sent by Western capitals, and that was the statements that were made by our secret services, by our legislative bodies, and many experts spoke about it in recent days. But just look, this is ideology that goes back in history, that is 80 years long. For several months ago, we have celebrated 80th anniversary of the great victory in the Great Patriotic War, the 80th anniversary of the end of war in Europe, And then the Second World War ends, and we again celebrated its 80th anniversary of its end. And we are approaching another milestone, which is the 80th anniversary of Fullstone's speech, which has identified new prospects of confrontation in the second half of the 20th century and in the beginning of the 21st century. In parallel, at that time, when the whole world was happy about having the chance for the future, they've been devising the plans to attack the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons. In 1946, they've discussed to rob oil deposits of Iran, where Americans, well, it sounds quite familiar, where American and British companies blackmailed, have acquired permission with blackmail for oil production in an unrestricted way from the Iranian government. Again, it happened 80 years ago, and the situation with Iran is repeating itself today. Well, the situation changed significantly. Advantages that the Western countries gained by colonial and neo-colonial exploitation of other peoples is not enough to preserve their dominance, to which they got used to and that they don't want to lose. And they have been using other resources of other countries. Countries of the world majority speak out about their rights. They increase the economic, industrial, scientific capabilities. They strengthen their state sovereignty. All of that helps to expedite the process for the formation of a more just, multiple world order that is based on the balance of powers and interests of all states without hegemony, without dictate and attempts to suppress competitors. By saving the world from tyranny, as it was said in the proverbial Fulton speech of Winston Churchill. Their so-called democratic concerns. And today, present day, so let's talk about the origins of the situation in Ukraine. Neo-Nazism that stems from Nazism, new anti-heroes that have appeared from other anti-heroes, nuclear weapons, peaceful use of nuclear energy that ends up in the hands of terrorists and the Kiev regime that becomes a tool of blackmailing today. February 24th, we have already published a detailed commentary about the special military operation and all its aspects. We have responded to all accusations against us. We have substantiated it with facts. You can find the text on the website of the Russian Foreign Ministry. You will find the evaluations that forced Russia to make a decision to launch the operation. I would like to touch on several aspects that justify the special military operation, and I would like to provide specific facts. For years, they've been trying to convince us that we inflate the threat of Nazism in Ukraine, that we have no right to speak about genocidal tendencies of the Kiev regime, that we are deceiving the whole world when we say that the threat of Nazism exists in Ukraine, but every day there is more and more compelling evidence that confirms the righteousness of our cause. Today we see that Nazism in the territory of the former Ukrainian SSR is not something typical for fringe groups several years ago. Today, it's the foundation of the Ukrainian state policy, which aims to create a mono-ethnic state by exterminating ethnic Russians and by erasing any mentioning of Russia. And they want to do the same way with the Hungarian minority and other minority ethnic groups. I have many times advocated for what we truly call an attempt, the Ukrainian attempts to destroy everything that is Russian, that is connected to Russia. The objective of the Zelensky regime usurped power in Kiev to turn population of its country that is taken hostage by the regime into, I would like to use the terms that is used by the office of the president. They want to turn Ukrainians into robots, into mancurts that will be submitted by the regime. You can clearly see what is happening there. They make people to be slaughtered meekly. Today it's difficult to kill them because they resisted to these attempts, but this leads to their death because they are killed on the battlefield. They are killed when they are forced in these minivans, microbuses. I even don't know how to call these cars, these vehicles, manhunting vehicles that they are using against Ukrainians. They have an objective that Kiev should reach at the order of the Western countries. They want to erase the memory about the heroic ancestors. That is what actually happens in Ukraine. The Ukrainian Institute of National Memory is responsible for the distortion of history and erasure of memory about its heroic pages of its history when Russians and Ukrainians fought together against foreign invaders and lived in a single state. We've been spoken about that body in 2025, and we substantiated our explanation with facts. And in 2025, this institute has acquired a status of a central executive body. Its size of staff was increased and financing was expanded. It is headed by the outspoken admirer of Hitler, Alexander Alferov, who takes the liberty to make offensive and derogatory statements against the Russian people. There is no doubt what national memory this Nazi is trying to form by using the available tool set. In parallel, the Kiev regime is waging war against the largest religious denomination, which is the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which has the largest number of believers. They continue to take over churches using physical force. There are repressions against clergy and parishioners, and criminal proceedings are launched against them on false charges. There are lawsuits filed by the Ukrainian State Service of Ukraine on ethnic policy and freedom of consciousness, which bans the operation of the Kiev metropolis of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and expropriation of property. There is another lawsuit filed by the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture on the expulsion of clergy from the Kiev Pechers Lavra. In February, the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture terminated free lease of two buildings in the lower part of Lora that was used by the canonical church. These were the premises where the residence of the Metropolitan Onufry was located, as well as the office of Kiev Metropolis. On February 17th, again, the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture banned access of the Ukrainian clergy to two churches, the Church of the Exaltation of the Cross and Church of All Revered Fathers of Kiev Pechers Lavra, where padlocks were broken and replaced. Just look what is going on. In our countries, we have saint icons that were important for centuries for our people, and due to these circumstances, certain circumstances in the early 20th century, these icons were seized and taken away from churches, and again they were returned later, and they have taken their place, their rightful place, and those who guarded these artifacts like ministries, archives, have always carefully treated these artifacts, and they have been accepting them. And these icons also were sent to churches and monasteries. And just look what is Ukraine doing. they are waging the war under the slogan of decommunization of these negative manifestations of the 20th century, all that was done by the Soviet authorities. What are they doing? They are following a horrible path when they take sacred items away from churches and monasteries. Apart from churches and history, there is another main enemy of the Kiev regime, which is the Russian language. Ukraine has enacted so many bills and laws against the Russian law. There is no other place in the world that would do that. The Russian language is banned in science, culture, education, advertisement, and services. They are doing everything, yet there is no result of their efforts because people in Ukraine continue to speak Russian. They continue to think in Russian. Well, what probably the Kiev regime could do with that? Well, probably they need to cut their heads to stop people speaking Russian and thinking in Russian. Well, they could impose more restrictions, but these restrictions do not work, have no effect. And these restrictions won't change the situation because in the history of humankind, such measures never helped such evil forces who have such misanthropic logic. According to the Ukrainian Minister of Culture, Tatiana Berezhnaya, the Ukrainian State Committee for Television and Radio Broadcasting has been working on the draft decree to remove Russian language books from circulation. Well, probably they will burn books next, and they plan to prohibit printing and distribution of Russian and Russian language literature. By commenting this initiative, a Ukrainian MP, Maria Zakharova, claimed, quote, and I quote, as the Russian Church, says Solomea Bobrovskaya, the Russian literature, as she says, should disappear from the Ukrainian cultural space, end of quote. I apologize. Are they going to ban the works of Nikolai Gogol in Russian? Or probably they will leave him alone and will make an exception for him, or not? Or they're going to rewrite it into Ukrainian and they will speak to future generations that Nikolai Gogol has never spoken Russian. And someone will try to say that there is no Nazism in Ukraine. Well, I don't know. After the Second World War, the dehumanization and prohibition of fonts, books, languages, that's what was described as Nazism. Twisted logic of neo-Nazis who are fighting against everything Russia is unbridled. Last week, Ukrainian military officer Andrei Onistrat, a neo-Nazi, stated that a war will be over once you stop speaking Russian, end of quote. And now let's think about it, how hellish this phrase sounds, because for persons who use the Russian language as a native one, they think in Russian, they read in Russian, they use it in their family, they sing in Russian, think in Russian. Well, does it mean that this person has to die according to this officer? Well, that phrase becomes even more clear because according to the Ukrainian military, the war will be over once everyone will die there. And he's echoed by Minister of Education, Oksana Lysavoy, who accused the Russian language, and can you even imagine of what? Of missile attacks, claiming that if a person doesn't make a correlation between missile attacks, said the Minister of Education, a correlation between a missile attack and the Russian language, then this person has certain problems with cause and effect relationship. End of quote. And it should be taken into account that everyone in Ukraine knows that Zelensky speaks Russian, thinks in Russian. Again, he communicates in Russian. Where is it even logical? Yes, it is logical because it's hate speech. It's misanthropic logic. Because if there is, if someone doesn't make a correlation between the start of the special military operation, rampant neo-Nazism and genocide of Russian and Ukrainians, then we have bad news for them. They have an incurable condition which is called Nazism. On February 24th, another Russophobic group made a political pilgrimage to Kiev, in particular President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and leaders of Northern European Baltic states and Croatia. Their visit was conceived as a demonstration of enduring commitment to Ukraine's just fight. They planned to substantiate that with the specific steps from Brussels, which is the adoption of the 20th package of anti-Russian sanctions and the so-called 90 billion euro military loan, which is also called by Ursula von der Leyen as a steel porcupine loan for 2026-2027, for the period of 2026-2027. And they plan to spend 2/3 of the loan on military needs of Ukraine. However, it didn't work out apart from empty picture and loud and tired slogans, and even Zelensky haven't received any clear answer to Ukraine's accession to the EU.
He was told by Ursula von der Leyen in particular that it is quite soon that they can see how Ukraine is making an effort and does everything it could and even more to join the EU, and the membership is not far away, but no one knows when. The very same day, the Kiev held a meeting of the coalition of the willing with the President of France, British Prime Minister and Chancellor of Germany joined online. It turned out to be nothing more than a riot. It becomes more clear that in the documents and statements the participants do not speak anymore, that they believe without any doubt in the military victory of the Kiev regime. Their main task is to support the way they can the minimal military capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine, and to make sure that the Zelensky regime lasts for some more time. The Europeans yet again showed that they really create obstacles to the settlement of the conflict. Antonio, for example, Antonio Costa said directly, I quote, Russia, as he said, cannot be permitted to make gains at the negotiation table. Oh my God, you are not even there. And no one is expecting you there. No one has invited you there because you do not know how to behave. You were there once, but you lied, you cheated and tricked, but you were caught. So stay under the table and do not say a word. But Ursula von der Leyen, though, said that the European Union, will not relent until peace is restored. Peace, she added, on the Ukraine's terms. End of quote. This frenzy or aggressive sentiment, probably together, was caught by the newly appointed defense minister of Ukraine, Mikhail Fedorov, who said that, I quote, every day of war should become a threat to the existence of Russia itself. End of quote. What kind of peace are we talking about? What Ukraine's terms are we talking about? I cannot quite grasp that. The British continue to show active interest in preserving instability in our region. They create obstacles to long-lasting and resilient settlement of the crisis. They do everything they can to prevent any kind of settlement. The then Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, you remember, he in April 2022 talked the Kiev words out of peace agreement, but they had very beneficial conditions back then. He, according to the Wall Street, extinguished himself with new outrageous statements. In particular, he called on the Europeans to support Kiev more actively and to build up finances to Ukraine at the expense of the Russian frozen assets. At the same time, the British Defense Minister John Healey said that he will hope to become the first defense minister who will send troops to Ukraine. They already sent troops to Ukraine without peace 8 years ago, so he won't be the first one. From the British budget will allocate 200 million pounds to establish staff on multinational forces of the coalition of the Willings with 70 people in the personnel. They want to do everything they can not to stop the war. 70 people will work, or I don't know, just be there, play games, or I don't know what they're going to do in that staff. 70 people. Despite misconception of John Healey, the deployment of British troops in Ukraine will mean not the end of the war, but protraction of conflict and higher risk of a large-scale military conflict with the participation of many more countries. As we said many times, in case of military intervention on Ukraine, the foreign contingents will become a legitimate target for us. Western experiments with the Ukrainian project led to sad social and economic situation in the country, woes and losses for many people. Since coup d'etat in 2014, Ukraine appeared to be in a deep demographic crisis. The population in the regions under the control of the Kiev regime, in comparison with the Soviet period, has decreased by almost twofold. According to the migration bodies of Ukraine, it stood at 28.7 million people on September 1st, 2025. But this happened because of the police impunity, mass repressions against the dissent, impunity of national radicals, the use of force against civilians. As a result, there's lower birth rates. People flee in an attempt to avoid participating in the war to the last Ukrainian. And of course, they flee from the nationalist frenzy that started in the Ukraine by the Ukrainian nationalism after World War II, was designed by the Anglo-Saxons. The relevant circumstances and facts were given in great detail in the article of the Deputy Chairman of the Council of Security of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, published in the Rodina Journal, issue number 1, 2026. We sent several copies to the embassies of Western countries in Moscow, not only to those who directly involved in the cultivation of ideas of radical nationalism and neo-Nazism in Ukraine, but also to those who will find it useful to know the sources of this phenomena and know their Anglo-Saxon puppeteers, as well as to realize who and what they sponsor today as in finance and military support to Ukraine. I hope that after careful study of this material, they will report to their capitals. The Kiev regime is suffering losses on the far fronts. They channel their anger against civilians in Russia. They commit terror attacks, targetedly strike the populated neighborhoods, essential facilities, social, educational, medical facilities. The Ukrainian neo-Nazis remotely mined roads close to settlements, As a result, there were several cases of civil vehicles being blown up in the last week from the actions of the armed forces of Ukraine in various Russian regions. At least 120 people were influenced, including 2 children. 14 people were killed. I'll give you only several facts. The Belgrade region. On February 17th through 21st, a drone killed 1 person, while 5 people